Welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt and our short shares with Professor Paul Gilbert. Now it's time to talk about the inhibitors to compassion, the fears, blocks and resistances. And as Paul says, in compassion-focused therapy, working with fears, blocks and resistances is the work. One of the really great contributions from you and into the world of therapy, really, and obviously CFT is just this, well, among many other things, but is just this identification of the notion of fears, blocks and resistances. You mentioned that a little bit earlier, that was sort of the second shock in a way, that you just noticed that people were very resistant to changing the tone, to sort of treating themselves in these, sort of kinder ways. Can you talk a bit about fears, blocks and resistances, I guess, and maybe a little bit about, sort of how we work with them?
Yeah. So, I think all motives have fears, blocks and resistances. People who, for example, people of a homosexual persuasion who were growing up, say, 100 years ago in a very right wing, where they believed that this was a sin against God, they would have quite a few. So fears, blocks and resistances can often be the result of the environments in which we've grown up in, which have made compassion something to be scared of, right? So the key thing is, when you're working with them, is always to see them as wisdoms, the wisdom of protection, not as problems, because very well that when you're training therapists, the moment they run into them, they think, oh no, can't do it, it's not going to work. And you say to them, no, that is the work. The resistance is the work. Okay, it's not the problem, it is the work. So fears basically are to do with what's going to happen. I don't think I'll be able to do it. And when I start to do it, I just get overwhelmed by sad emotions. I just get too sad. So in other words, when they begin to do it, the very thing that should happen, which is to take them into their distress and their pain, to guide them into that, is doing it. But then they say, no, I can't do it. It overwhelms me. So it's like, when you're doing surgery, you're starting to cut people over, it's starting to bleed, and they say, oh, you can't do it, people are bleeding. But stop the surgery, people are bleeding. It's the same with compassion. When you start that road, people are going to start feeling, right? So it's then how you as a therapist start to work with that, because they are highly orientated to avoidance. That's what they've done all their life. They've tried to avoid it. They don't want to engage in that level of pain. So they are set up, no, I don't want to do this. So you have to be aware that they are very frightened about what's happening to them, very frightened of the feelings that are coming up. They can be frightened that if I become compassionate, then I'll lose my ambition. And that's why we always come back to the fact that compassion is the most courageous and dedicated, wise of all of our motivational systems. There is no way you're going to lose your motivation with compassion. You're going to strengthen it, not losing it. So that's really quite important. So there can also be all kinds of fears about misunderstanding. Another thing, and this is one of my bugbears, people associate compassion with all kinds of stuff like love and all that stuff. Look, you don't need to love yourself in order to be compassionate. You don't need to love everybody to be compassionate, right? You can be compassionate to people you don't like, actually, because compassion is simply the wish for you not to suffer. Okay, now I might not remember your birthday, but I don't want to see you suffering no matter what. I don't want to see that. So it's that desire. So you're a client of mine, I don't need to like you particularly, but I do need to really not want you to have to suffer. So that issue about suffering is the central issue of compassion. So that's another bit that happens when people got these misunderstandings about compassion. They think I have to learn to love myself. You say, no, you don't. You just don't cause yourself hassle. So these are really important things. So then you run into blocks. So fears are anything to do with the fear of the journey, what I'm experiencing, what will happen to me, what does this mean, what will I become, so on. Then you run into blocks, and sometimes blocks are again to do with people don't really understand it, or they don't know what to do. They would be compassionate, but they haven't got much of a clue what they're supposed to be doing, so you show them that, just guide them through. And then you have resistances. Now, resistances often have fears underneath, but there can be many reasons for it. So, for example, some people don't want to help immigrants because they think it's too costly or whatever. It's going to cost me too much. So you often get resistance when people don't want to make the sacrifice. I'm going to lose too much. Okay. I know I should give up drinking, but I really like it. Now you're very good at this. I think motivation interview is very good when people are resistant to change because they don't really want to have to give up the drinking or whatever it is because they like it, or they're worried about what will happen. So your motivation interviewing, I think, has a lot to teach us about how we work with resistance. And then underneath that, you've got issues of deserve. Now, issues of deserve are often linked to shame. And this is to do with things like a secret life. Now, Carl Jung often used to say, when people get stuck in therapy, it's because they have unrevealed secrets. They're not telling you what's going on. Okay. And this is very, for those of people who work with shame, this is often the issue. So I remember, and I've written about this recently, somebody saying to me a long time ago, there's no way I deserve compassion. So, well, what's that mean? Well, no. Now, if you knew what went on inside my head, you would not think I deserved compassion. It was took a little bit of time before we worked out together. She started to trust me and say, look, to be honest with you, I just feel so much anger with everything. Sometimes I just think I just want to smash everybody. I just want to scream. I wake up in the morning and I'm just so fucking angry. There's no way I can be compassionate to that. So I can't. I'm just not a very nice person. So those are when you get these things going on in that person that they feel they've sinned or they've done something terrible or whatever that they don't deserve compassion for. They deserve to be punished. And so the sort of self-criticism is a way of keeping them on track and making sure they don't do bad again. Another example I often use in the training that you probably know is a young girl who was abused by a shopkeeper, and she went back because the shopkeeper was giving her stuff for the family, and the family was very poor. And and there were many other things, obviously, but one of the things I was trying to help her with while she was in hospital is to say, look, that wasn't your fault, I'm okay. So you went back there, you knew what was going to happen, but still, you're 10 years old, you're getting stuff for your family, it was not your fault. And she said, that's terrible. Trying to get me to not blame myself like that is terrible, because then I'd be a really bad person. At least I know I'm a little bit good because I know I was bad. Oh, right. Okay. All right. Okay. So in other words, sometimes with shame people, if they believe that punishment is the only route to atonement, if they believe that you have to be punished in order to be able to feel that you're worthy, that's a sticking point. And that can be quite unconscious as well, the idea that I have to be punished. And you'll get this in some religions, actually, where people feel they've been born into sin and they're basically sinners, they have to be punished. You probably see some of Tom Hanks's books where people would beat themselves and all that stuff. So this idea that I don't deserve good things because of the bad things, that can be quite tricky for people. And when you get deeply into it, as you know, I won't go into details here, but some of the things that people are ashamed about are pretty horrible for them, really.
And I think one of the very profound concepts that I've learned, sort of from you is just that notion of compassion for the dark side, or that notion that actually, absolutely, it's not about liking or loving certain bits about ourselves, that in fact,
exactly.
The work is around, how might we bring compassion to the bits of ourselves that really a part of us does hate, or sort of, and that's tough, but sort of powerful work, isn't it, for people to bring compassion to the dark side?
For us, that's what it's about. Okay, people want to be happy and all that stuff, that's great, but that's a separate domain, and good for people to do that. So no, but it is compassion for suffering and the causes of suffering, and sometimes the people who cause suffering, because they never chose. If you think about a psychopath, they didn't wake up when they were 5 years old and thought to themselves, you know what, I could be a really nice person and be a surgeon or a psychotherapist like Dan and do a lot of good, but the fact that I want to be a psychopath. It's not happening, right? People find themselves in gene-built bodies that they never chose, having life experiences that they never chose, and therefore having a mind that pushes them with desires and fantasies and urges that they really don't know much about, but they just act out. So, we were having a discussion with some colleagues the other day, and you look at all of the rather unpleasant leaders around the world. I mean, they're all terrible backgrounds, all terrible childhoods. So,
the wisdom of fears, blocks and resistances, and the courage to bring compassion to the dark side. In episode 6, our final episode, Paul offers a sense of compassion-focused therapy in a nutshell, and a little on what's next for CFT.